Today on GameWorks, we talk about Limbo and how it shows whether or not video games are works of art. And we ain't talking about no modern art squares. We talking about that Picasso, Mozart, Gandhi shit. Before we talk about whether or not something is an art form, we have to actually define art. People have written books about this topic and devoted their very lives to it, but I plan to clear up all the controversy in this paragraph, so don't even worry about it. Leo Tolstoy writes in What is Art that a real work of art destroys in the consciousness of the receiver the separation between himself and the artist. Not that alone, but also between himself and all whose minds receive this work of art. This means that art, as we're going to look at it in this episode, is 1. Something that is made by a person. 2. Communicates and transmits emotions, ideas, and thoughts. And 3. Uses deeper means than that of simple description or representation. Or to put it another way, relies on more than just the face value of a word or image to communicate its message. Now, I know that this definition, or any definition of art for that matter, is highly debatable, and feel free to debate it in the comments. But I think that we can all agree that this list of parameters is the very least fair and a good place to start from. Now we have to look at Limbo to see if we can fit it into this definition. Limbo was first conceived by Arndt Jensen in 2004 while he was working at the game studio IO Interactive. As he became unhappy with the commerciality of the company, he created an art style trailer in 2006 to try to attract another programmer to help him create his own game. He eventually found Dino Patty? God, he's fucking Scandinavian. As the trailer gained substantial hype across the internet. Together, the two created Playdead Studios. Playdead, through the course of the 2.5-year development cycle for Limbo, chose to defy conventional standards and critical advice to add things like multiplayer and multiple difficulty levels, as they felt that this would defy the central vision of the game. They had to create their own game engine and other tools to create the distinctive art and game feel inside of the game. They also had one artistic director entirely focused on programming the aesthetics and motions of the unnamed main character, since he was the center of the screen the entire game and would be the most focused on aspect by most players. The visual design is one of the more interesting aspects of the game, and is most of the reason the custom game engine was created. Most of the time, the game's visuals have a very layered feel, with 3 distinct planes that set pieces are placed on. The main character and puzzles usually remain in the center one, with other structures falling either in front of or behind him relative to the screen. The background layer gives the world a sense of realism and expansiveness, while the objects that are placed between the screen and the character simultaneously give the player a sense of entrapment and claustrophobia. The textured black, white, and gray effect is also very crucial to the game. As different objects intersect each other, they become difficult to distinguish between. In the beginning of the game, you can't even distinguish the boy from the ground he's lying on until he opens his eyes, which are by far the brightest things in the entire game. This gives the action and objects a very mysterious, ambiguous feeling. Martin Stig Anderson, the game's composer and sound designer, also deserves credit for much of the game's ambiance. The very subtle sound design and compositions, made mostly from the sound effects within the game, work with the minimalistic visuals and character design to create a canvas that the player can be drawn into and project their feelings on. He also worked to intentionally defy the expectations of the player, doing things like playing angelic chords while the player dodges machine gun fire, and softening the background sounds as the spider enemy approaches you. Spoiler warning for the next section: if you want to skip directly to the part where I talk about games as art, click right here. Yep, right there. If you don't want spoilers, if you don't want to be told about spoiler things, just click that button. I didn't script this part. By Jensen's own account, the art direction slacked off a bit near the end of the game, so I'm going to be focusing mainly on the first half, and any discussion of the first half of the game would be remiss to not focus on the spider. It first appears in the game as a large, impassable obstacle, and even after dear God! And even after you find the solution to the puzzle and the spider slinks off into the trees, the feeling of danger and impressiveness does not diminish. As we look into the next puzzle, I want to go back and look at 2 things this game has established in our minds thus far. That the easy or straightforward option will often kill you, and the death scenes are very creative and often gory. By now, the players become accustomed to these facts about this game, so let's go through this puzzle step by step. You walk into this cave, potentially on guard because you just fought off a giant spider and there appear to be webs everywhere, or potentially you're just rushing forward like a fucking idiot. Either way, you end up being caught by the web. Now, at this point, you assume this web is part of a puzzle. As I mentioned before, this game has taught us that rushing into things will get us killed, and this seems on the surface to be exactly what is happening here. Though, it doesn't seem to be immediately killing you, so you assume there must be some other solution to get out of it. And then you see the spider. It seems to be moving at a slow enough pace to give you time to figure out some sort of puzzle, and from what we know of this game and of gaming in general, this seems to logically fit what is going on. This makes you struggle to get out or to find some sort of solution before the spider gets to you, and this helps make the feeling of panic and fear that we presume the character is feeling very real to the player in more than just an empathetic way. It's fine to feel bad for a plight that is happening to a character on screen, but having game mechanics and design choices that make the player themselves feel the way the character does is really cool. It's an especially impressive feat for this particular game, in which the character has no facial expressions or words to convey any emotional impact. It's all done through deeper means and specifically designed choices. But anyways, back to the puzzle. Now, again, everything that this game has taught us thus far would make you think, well, yep, that's it, I'm dead, I'm fucking dead, see you later, puzzle, I'm fucking out! But then, you don't respawn. You just sit there. Now, as someone playing this game, your first instinct is going to be to start pushing buttons to see what's happening. And then your character starts moving. The first time I played this level, this blew my fucking mind. I was just sitting there thinking, what? Everything I know about this game tells me that I should be dead, but I ain't dead! The way that Limbo perfectly plays with your emotions and expectations about itself and games in general is truly astounding, I think. Slow clap for you, Limbo. Slow clap for you. And then we move on to other puzzles that are very well timed to make you fear the spider with a rollin' ball and fuck! Falling through bushes, what I don't give a fuck! Then you get to the other boys, who provide a nice and creative set of puzzles with a really dark mood. In defeating their puzzles, you end up feeling pretty successful. For once, there are people trying to stop you, and you're winning. Yeah! Yeah! Hide in your freaking treehouse, you dick! And then, when you're feeling most victorious, the spider returns. This is one of several times where the game does an amazing job of giving and then taking away your fleeting feeling of victory. Before, you had defeated this random guy and felt pretty good about it, but now the oppressive mortality of the Limbo world returns in the form of the spider re-entering the screen, flinging aside the dead body of the other boy. Suddenly, your victory is a shallow one. It isn't a game to be won anymore, it's merely about survival. This next puzzle is perfectly designed so that Perfectly designed so that once you push this box, you can easily get away from the spider, as the platforms are perfectly spaced to be jumped across easily. As you rush ahead and get further away from the spider, you feel as if you're defeating this puzzle, which experience with games will tell you is simply about getting away from the spider. But then, you reach the log. This log is clearly positioned so that you need to weigh down one side with something so that you can jump from the other side. The only thing to weigh it down with? The spider. Suddenly, all the space that you put between you and the danger is turned into time to wait as the horror of the deadly spider lurches towards you. With how the physics works in the game, you can't even stay on the other edge of the log. To complete the puzzle, you have to stand in the middle, and wait as the monster you've been taught to fear gets within a hair's breadth of you. If this didn't make your butt cheeks clench at least a little bit, then you're probably a sociopath. And now, we get to the death of the spider. In a relatively simple puzzle, you crush the spider down a hole with a boulder. Now, again, you feel pretty victorious, until, as you see in the next section, the spider still manages to survive. This time, it's crippled and weak, are you fucking kidding me? Once you take off its last leg in a cruel, slow pull, you have to use its dead body to bridge a gap. Once again, the Limbo world has made your fleeting victory ring hollow by facing you with the consequences and reality of your actions of torturing and killing this spider to simply progress forward. Do I feel bad? Should I feel bad? This game asks all of these questions without ever uttering a word. Now, can any of this prove whether or not this game, or any game, could be considered art? I'm not trying to say that all video games are art, by any means. No Duke Nukem. No. Crawl back in your corner. Go. Go. Bad game. Very bad game. 15-year development cycle, my ass! But we have to at least court the possibility that they are, and I would like to put forward an even more contentious opinion, that games have the potential to become art even more fully and readily than classical artistic compositions. Let's look at the criteria that we listed out earlier and see if they can apply to video games. Number 1! Art must be made by a person! Yes. Number 2, art transmits complex emotions, ideas, and thought. Video games are singularly concerned with conveying thoughts, emotions, and ideas to players, beyond the point that many people believe. Every piece of a game usually is geared towards a player's immersion and enjoyment of that game. This connection necessarily implies that emotions, thoughts, and ideas are transferred, for if players don't feel this connection, the games can't really become fun. Looking at Limbo, we can see the game designer's well-thought-out puzzle design and penchant for playing with expectations is a perfect example of this, constantly teaching and presenting to you new ideas and emotions. A common criticism of video games being considered art is that the interactivity and player control takes the creative license over the art from the author, and that characteristic negates its artistic merits. However, I feel like this interpretation is degrading not only to video games, but classical art as well. Every time another person experiences art, they take some control over the interpretation and meaning of that art away from the author. If enough people see a certain aspect of the art the artist did not intend to exist, then effectively control of the interpretation of the art has been taken from the artist. If we go by this criticism then, the one true art is the one that has been locked away from human contact and inevitable interpretation, or is so simplistic that only one intent, the author's, can be seen through it. It would be, of course, silly to think that way. In fact, this is the main way that video games have the potential to become even more artistic than classical art, their ability to connect with the people playing them. The struggle for most art is to engage and immerse the viewer in more than just an empathetic way, to really put them in for them to become, in some way, as the subject of the art, and experience it like it's happening to them. Video games have the ability to do that almost immediately, and in many cases can deepen that experience, like with many of the design choices and mechanics I mentioned earlier in Limbo. They have an even greater potential to connect with the player than most art, because in most cases you do actually become the subject of the game, at least in the superficial way of taking control of the subject, and often in a much deeper way of experiencing things as the character does. Number 3, art uses deeper meanings than that of simple description. And this, unfortunately, is where most games miss the mark. Many games can't be said to have much of a deeper meaning. I will admit that even my favorite goddamn game ever, yes, those ones right there, fails for the most part to give us anything deeper than the storyline itself. To be clear, whether or not something is art is not necessarily a reflection on its quality, just on whether it carries deeper emotional value and significance. Deeper meanings are intrinsically personal, and therefore personal interpretations are inevitable outcomes. That's the real crux here. The games must offer up deeper, personal, and interpretable meanings to be considered art. Limbo is, perhaps, the perfect example of this. Look up Limbo interpretations online, and you're sure to spend several solid hours sifting through thousands of different ways the emotional resonance of the game can be interpreted. This shows us the different moments of emotional impact in the game, which are made by design, play to deeper emotional truth that the creators are trying to invoke. This clearly answers several other criticisms of video games as art that have arisen over the years. Roger Ebert, a preeminent film critic, separated games from art, saying one obvious difference between art and games is that you can win a game. It has rules, points, objectives, and outcomes. This, to him, separates them from art, which can only be experienced as opposed to played. Similarly, Michael Saman and Ari Harvey, the founding members of the indie game studio Tale of Tales, argue that games fill a physical need, unlike art which satisfies a higher function in search for human truth. I feel like many of the distinctions come from what is essentially an accident of our language, that video games just happen to have the word game in them. This confuses the issue. Regular games and video games are not so easily conflated. At their origin, video games were essentially similar to board games and cards, simply done digitally. By now, however, video games have morphed into an entirely different medium. Any objective observer would never put chess and Call of Duty, especially Sneaky People 5, in the same category, and they shouldn't. They are utterly different creations and fill entirely different roles. We also have to consider that video games, as we look at them today, have only existed for slightly over 30 years. The Legend of Zelda franchise only just hit its 25th anniversary, for Christ's sake, and that's why I say video games have the potential to become art, because we simply aren't at the point where video games have the store of knowledge and experience, where every game can be turned into fine art. Hell, the founders of many of the original concepts in gaming that we take for granted, like platforming, are still alive today. Discounting a new medium just because it involves fun, play, has commerciality, and has a widespread reach rings their pretentiousness, for lack of a better word. The fact is, we're still learning how video games work, their limitations and potentials, and what exactly they are. Are they simply akin to an interactive movie, a digital card game, or can they become more than that? Looking at Limbo, we can see a very intentional depth and interpretive element that is achieved through design structure and techniques that very specifically belong to the realm of video games, showing us that video games can be art, and that someday, just maybe, they will become the pinnacle of artistic achievement. Like if you like to like things, comment if you commonly comment on things, and subscribe. Yes, alright, I know that Gandhi is not an artist. You can unclick the dislike button. Jeez. Also, I made another video about my personal interpretation of the Limbo story. If you want to see it, click here. Back to the outro! Oh yeah, I just made that jump. Oh god, no!
I came in like a wrecking ball. Yeah, that one you just saw on screen. I hit that character in the face, and I killed him dead.